Chapter 18. Anna was missing. Her horse had returned, but she, the princess of Arendelle, had not. Hans plastered a look of concern on his face as he stood holding the reins of Anna's horse. He keenly felt the eyes of Arendelle's people upon him and knew his every movement and every expression was being watched closely. Of course, it wasn't hard to look concerned. When the horse had first returned, Hans had been genuinely frightened. His heart had lurched and his palms had grown sweaty. Letting Anna race up into the mountains unaccompanied had not felt right to him in the first place. With her out of his sight, he had no control over the one person he needed the most control of. If Anna was missing, or worse, hurt, everything was in jeopardy. He couldn't become king without a princess to become queen. Taking a deep breath, Hans took in the reactions of those around him. The villagers who still remained in the square looked concerned. That he had expected, but he was pleased to note they were looking to him for help. The dignitaries, too, were watching him process the sudden turn of events. Some, like his new allies, were expressions of concern, while others, such as the Duke, looked far too pleased for Hans's liking. The Duke was busily whispering to one of his men, who in turn looked Hans up and down before nodding. Saying something back to the Duke, the two men smirked. "Princess Anna's horse," he heard someone shout. "What happened to her?" another villager cried out. "Where is she?" Then another older voice called out shakily, "Why hasn't she stopped the winter?" The words chilled Hans to the core. The thought had not crossed his mind until that very moment. So focused on what Anna's disappearance might mean for his chance at the crown, he had failed to think of the bigger picture. If Anna was gone, there was a very good chance that their ability to end the winter was gone as well. Elsa felt no warmth for Hans, that was clear. Even if he was to go after her himself, what incentive would she have to listen to him when he begged her to end the winter? The only reason he had felt comfortable letting Anna go in the first place was because he believed she was the only one capable of putting an end to this winter. And now that chance might have slipped through his fingers. His stomach dropped. Raising his eyes, he saw that while he had been lost in thought, the crowd had been silent, waiting to see what he would say. Looking out over the sea of faces, the knot in his stomach began to ease. They were all looking to him, Prince Hans, to fix this. From the oldest man to the youngest girl, they all had hope and trust written across their faces. If they thought him responsible and brave, he would have to act responsible and brave. He would deal with the issue of winter as it came. First, he needed to find Anna. "Princess Anna is in trouble," he announced to the people. "I need volunteers to go with me to find her." Instantly, a flood of people rushed forward, offering their services. Some were farmers, others castle staff. Some were old, while others looked like they had only just left their mother's sides. Hans couldn't help wondering, if the situation were different and if it were Hans who had disappeared somewhere in the southern Isles, would there be such an outpouring of love? Probably not. Yet here these people are, offering to risk their lives for a princess they have hardly seen for years. Focusing on the crowd, Hans quickly sized up who he thought would be the most help. "You," he said, pointing to a young man who looked roughly his age. "I'll take you. And you, sir," he added, pointing to a slightly older farmer with strong arms. "You can come as well." As he continued to handpick a group, he was met with some resistance. "Why won't you take me, Prince Hans?" a boy who looked no more than 10 asked, looking up at him with big weepy eyes. "I want to help." "I do too," a little girl said, stepping up. She clutched the tattered blanket in her hand and had to take her thumb out of her mouth to speak. "I love Princess Anna. She's so brave." Hans knew he was being watched, his every move scrutinized. This was his moment to impress the people of Arendelle, to win them over. He crouched down so he was at eye level with the little girl. "I wish I could take you with me," he said, trying to be as kind as he knew Anna would be in the situation. "But I need you to stay here and be my eyes and ears in case she returns. I'll need you to tell her I love her very much and that I'll be back soon. Can you do that?" The little girl nodded shyly. "Thank you," Hans said, pinching her cheek gently. Then, standing up, he addressed the rest of the crowd. "Princess Anna would be touched by your concern, and as her representative, I thank you for your willingness to join me, but I cannot take everyone. The mountains are treacherous, and a large group would only slow us down. I ask that those of you who stay behind continue to keep the fires going as best you can and wait for my return. I promise I'll bring the princess back." Hans turned to the visiting dignitaries and raised an eyebrow. They had been surprisingly quiet when the townsfolk stepped up to the task. Where's their support gone? Hans wondered. Only a short time ago, some of them had been pledging their loyalty and making vows to support Arendelle under its new leadership. Now they were acting like school children hiding in the back of the class, hoping not to be called upon. Lords, sirs, Hans implored, will none of you offer help? Hans could hear the creaking of the ice underfoot in the silence that followed. Finally, the Lord of Kongsberg spoke up. I have with me only a few men, Prince Hans. If I were to send them with you. His voice trailed off, the excuse weak even to his ears. I too, said Prince Wils, would love to help, but do we really believe the princess can be saved? Look at the mountain. All eyes turned to view the monster looming in the distance. A soldier would have a hard enough time traversing the terrain. I doubt the princess could. He lowered his eyes. I'm sorry, Prince Hans, but I don't believe in wasting time or lives on a fool's errand. Hans narrowed his eyes. I appreciate your candor, but I'm not quite as willing as you to just give up. Prince Hans, the elder dignitary said hesitantly, I think what Prince Wilson is trying to say is that you should not be leaving at a time like this. Arendelle is holding on by a thread, and as you were quick to tell us earlier, you were chosen to leave in the princess's absence. If you were to go now... Instantly, the men around him began to mumble. Some agreed, while others thought the right thing to do was for Hans to go after the princess. As their voices began to increase in volume, the townsfolk took notice and began to nervously shift on their feet. Soon Hans could hear the murmuring words of doubt over his leaving. Hans loved every minute of it. That's enough, Hans shouted, silencing the men. I realize that leaving now is not the best of options, but I have no choice. I must go after my fiancée and return her to her people, and I expect all of you, in my absence, to stay strong. Do not mistake this decision as a sign of weakness on my part. See it for what it is, the act of a man in love with both the princess and his kingdom. I must get to the stables and be on my way, immediately. Hans was turning to go when he heard the Duke's little voice. Up until then, the Duke had been silent, watching Hans and the other dignitaries closely, but not adding to the debate. Now he stepped forward. I volunteered 2 men, my lord, he said. As the Duke ushered his 2 men forward, Hans sized them up. They looked like thugs, with deep-set eyes and frowns in their lined faces. Hans carefully noted that each of them rested a hand on a long, sharp sword. Keeping an eye on the Duke's obvious spies was hardly a distraction Hans needed at the moment, but he couldn't say no to the Duke's offer without raising suspicion. With a nod, Hans welcomed the men to his group. Telling the others he would meet them at the stables, Hans made his way over to the Slovenian dignitary. He was the only one Hans completely trusted, and Hans was going to need his help. Pulling him aside, Hans made sure no one was listening. Then, lowering his voice, he whispered into the man's ear. Keep an eye on the Duke, he said. I don't trust him. I think he is trying to undermine me. If he does anything, you will let me know as soon as I return, yes? Of course, Prince Hans, the man replied. Good, Hans said back, because I have enough problems to deal with without adding a weasel to the mix.